Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
See, when I talk names. No innuendos. So that you don't get no misunderstanding of who I'm dealing with. And like I said, if you're with Jesse, you're not with me. If I see you in the United Nations walking behind Jesse, you're not with me. If I see you behind Jesse and Mandela, you're not with me.
Today and tomorrow are back-to-back commemorations of arguably two of our greatest master teachers, Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochannan and Dr. John Henrik Clarke. Today is the birthday of Dr. Ben, and you know what? No matter what may be happening, I have to recognize and honor Dr. Ben. And why is that? Well, because Dr. Ben is in large part responsible for why I decided that I would begin calling out and celebrating our own holidays based on our heroes' birthdays. As Dr. Ben said, when it comes to something that's important to you, when it comes to having a holiday, you don't ask for a day, you take a day. And he was absolutely right. A black holiday is not something given to you by Congress or a racist president like Joe Biden. Black History Month is during the shortest and coldest month of the year. That's what letting white supremacy set your holidays for you gets you. So Dr. Ben is the main person who motivated me to do this. It's empowering to gather like-minded people together and to dedicate a day to someone or something that magnifies and glorifies us. So that's why I make it a point to honor Dr. Ben as part of our Holy Days remembrances, and it's the reason you should too. When it comes to a man like Dr. Ben, there's only going to be one. And so we have to honor him. We have to lift him up, show the world what he meant to us, and to show one another what we think about a true advocate for our people. Dr. Ben didn't have any ancestors who came from the killing fields of the American South, that's true. But it's also true that he was a ferocious proponent for those of us who did. A lot of people resented Dr. Ben's sharp criticisms of figures like Jesse Jackson and Nelson Mandela, but time has proven Dr. Ben right. In one of his lectures, he said that he was going to stick with black Americans because he felt that we were going to make it. Truth be told, he saw things in us that a lot of us didn't even see in ourselves. You can truly say on a number of different levels that they just don't make them like Dr. Ben anymore. You see, Dr. Ben was from that group of African and Caribbean immigrants who came to the U.S. in the early 20th century. They came here to join the fight, not to flee from the one at home. They were the real ones. The Stokely Carmichaels, the Marcus Garveys, the Ivan Van Sertima's. You had thought leaders and warrior scholars abounding who were showing up back then, a far cry from the likes of Barack Obama's father or the flood of tethers who came streaming in since the 1960s. What would Dr. Ben think of all of these turncoats coming in here after all of the work that he put in? Well, he told you. Any of these Negroes who were off code weren't with him. Dr. Ben understood that he was a black man. He didn't try to identify as some sort of immigrant, or to tell you that he stood in solidarity with people who come from countries that practice anti-black racism. He made it very clear that respect was a prerequisite for dealing with him, and that if you didn't come correct, you better not come at all. So many words describe Dr. Ben: sagacious, indomitable, courageous, discerning, profound, moving, eloquent, direct, but most of all, utterly fearless. When someone from the dominant society was wrong or misrepresenting the facts, Dr. Ben didn't hesitate to check them, and it didn't matter who it was. While other people were busy scurrying away when criticized by certain groups of people, Dr. Ben stood his ground and took them on, and in the process, he ran them off. When you had situations where there were these white Muslims or white Ashkenazi Jewish leaders who try to cast aspersions on the legitimacy of black Jews like Dr. Ben, he not only proved them factually wrong, but he immediately called out the anti-black racism that so often comes from the Jewish community, and he challenged them to stop the racism in their own midst. Dr. Ben's bold, uncompromising stance and his fearless advocacy for his people cost him so much, but it speaks volumes about the man's courage that not only did he not back down, but he also didn't stand around telling everybody how they should be grateful to him. He simply stood on business, and he let his reputation speak for itself. And yeah, the white powers that be did try to find a way if they could tempt this man, try to coerce him, try to get him to get on the team. So many of these other Negroes couldn't wait to sell out, couldn't wait to become turncoats. But Dr. Ben, for him, that simply wasn't an option. If the only way that Dr. Ben could get paid was to tell lies, then he would much rather not eat at all. If having to swallow white supremacy's lies was the cost of getting one's daily bread, then it would be better to starve. There's simply no substitute for moral courage. The bootlicks you see on white media, TV, and print, they would never do what Dr. Ben did because their jobs depend on them not rocking the boat. Well, Dr. Ben didn't just rock the boat, he blew holes in it and sank it out at sea. Men like Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark, they took the hard-nosed approach to power. If something does not serve your interest, then you're supposed to dump it. No questions asked. That's the kind of courage and fortitude that it took to break the mental shackles off of our people, at least some of us. And we had better rediscover and internalize that kind of mettle if we want to preserve ourselves. I've often told you that what people consider to be history is usually whatever they've been taught the most often, whatever they've heard the most often. That's what usually passes into popular knowledge as history. For the first 60 or so years after the end of chattel slavery, these white supremacists didn't allow for slavery to be taught in schools. This was their attempt to memory hole the issue, the first major attempt at erasing the greatest crime in human history. And it almost worked. A lot of people considered slavery to be a minor footnote at the turn of the 20th century. That is, until black people began demanding that the pages white supremacy tore out of the history books be put right back in there. And just to make sure people remembered it, we began telling it every chance we got. And that's where you get things like the 1619 Project, which was the leading issue that caused these little racists like Ron DeSantis to lose what passes for their minds and start banning the history books. You see, when you talk about American history, you have to mention slavery, because we made sure it was mentioned. We didn't take an opinion poll on the subject. We didn't ask permission. A free man or a free woman doesn't ask anyone if it's okay for them to tell their story. If your mind is free, then so is your tongue, and you don't bite your tongue nor hold your words for anyone. Dr. Ben lived that one out personally. Sure, he occasionally used the odd expletive here and there, but when you're discussing the dirtiest subject of all time, anti-black racism and the white supremacy that brought it about, you can't discuss it in completely antiseptic and sterilized terms. You want to talk about a dirty subject? Then from time to time, you might have to use some dirty words too. That's just a fact. Among black people who understand what's in our interest and also who understand what's worth remembering and cherishing, these days are special to us because we have chosen to declare them special. If you have any of Dr. Ben's books, take some time to review his words. Many of his lectures are available to watch on YouTube. You'd be doing yourself a favor by listening to Dr. Ben in his own words. See, every generation has some down-for-the-struggle brothers and sisters who have the courage to speak up and say what's been on the tip of everyone's tongues. And when these brave souls do speak up, there's always a rump contingent of sorry sellouts telling them to stop. Dr. Ben talked about these people all the time, these recalcitrants. When you have these black radical thinkers come along, there's always some go-along-to-get-along Negroes who tell them that they're gonna ruin it for everyone. And of course, the bootlicks who say this kind of cowardly gibberish are only thinking about themselves. When they say everyone, they just mean them. No matter what era it is, the true freedom fighters get mocked and ridiculed. Do you think you're some sort of radical? That's one that often gets lobbed at black people who speak up for our empowerment. And there's nothing new about it. They do it to us, and they did it to Dr. Ben as well. And the way to handle that is not to argue with them, but to intensify our efforts. You had people like Big Bird and his pals out there for decades pretending to be advocating for reparations. But when the black grassroots got out here and moved the ball forward, you had these clowns like N Cobra and others calling themselves criticizing us. They dang sure weren't standing with us. These phony organizations are tools of white supremacy. As we grow stronger, they get weaker. And mark my words, before it's all said and done, these bootlicks and shills and sellouts will be left in the ash heap of history, never to be mentioned again. You can't remember the chumps who called themselves assailing Dr. Ben's character or his work. Anyone remember any of those clowns? No. But we still remember Dr. Ben. And because of the fact we got our heads on straight, we make it a point to always remember him. We want to make certain that we never forget this man. Everyone knows full well the obstacles and forces of opposition that we face. Everyone knows we're owed reparations. But they don't dare speak on it, not because they think that it isn't owed, but because white power has conditioned black people to think that it won't ever happen. So as a result, black people take on a defeatist mindset and they don't even try. As a wise man once said, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. When they put mental shackles on you, they've basically defanged you. You literally won't even think about opposing them. And if you've been so defeated and broken that you can't even think about opposing your oppressor, then you're kidding no one but yourself if you try to claim that you'll actually do it. Speaking and acting for ourselves. That's what self-determination is all about. That's what black empowerment is all about. And we're not going to let any sellout shills and bootlicks call themselves speaking for us. That's why reparations has been so important as an issue. The black grassroots pushed for it, and more progress has been made on this issue in the last few years than in the last 150 years combined. The black grassroots put reparations on the map and made it a political issue. People of conscience know that the truth can't just be the truth. It must also be told. And that's why we have to make it a point to honor and remember our heroes, not merely at home, but in the public square. But teach about who it is who spoke up for us and stood up for us. No matter what the dominant society may be doing, how they try to ignore our accomplishments and our icons, there is no excuse for why our heroes should not be mentioned and taught about in every single black home and in every single black mind. Understand that. If you don't treat your icons like they deserve to be honored, then why should anyone else? And if you don't have individuals who come from your ranks who you honor, who you put on a pedestal, what that means is you're basically telling the world that nobody from your group really did anything. They didn't really stand for anything. Well, in our case, we would be denying reality to give in to that kind of a lie. Especially when your icons and heroes threaten everyone else's comfortable place under white supremacy. So, family, I humbly ask that on this day, the birthday of Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochannan, that you take some time to remember what this man has done. Listen to some of his words. Let them comfort, encourage, and embolden you. Because that's what he spent his life trying to do for his people. He taught us that when it comes to our holidays and our events and our history and culture, that we're not supposed to raise our hand and ask our oppressors for permission to observe these things. You just go ahead and do it. And that sends a message to everyone that you're standing in your own power and for your own interest. That's what Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochannan taught us. Don't ask for a day, you take a day. Because by doing so, you're practicing taking your own power too. And that being the case, we salute Dr. Yosef Ben-Jochannan. We cherish his memory, we honor his legacy, and we rededicate ourselves to living out the values that he embodied his entire life.